Robin, you have 5 minutes and then a couple of questions at the end of that. So over to you.
Kia ora tātou, thank you for hearing from us. My name is Robin Beeling. I'm speaking for Climate Liberation Aotearoa about including cruise ships in emission reduction targets. First, let's address the idea that cruise ships bring benefits, because the opposite is true. The following information comes from evidence, good statistics or peer-reviewed academic papers which I can share the references for. Tourism employs people and supports our economy, but the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research says most tourist spending is domestic, not international like cruise ships. The important statistic is that despite cruise ship passengers being 9% of international tourist numbers, they contribute only 3% of the total international tourist spend. So cruise ship passengers dramatically underspend in their contribution to our economy compared to the tourists who fly in. These are the most recent statistics we have from 2019, but we know this pattern of cruise tourists underspending hasn't changed because it's baked into the business model of the cruise industry. The cruise industry doesn't make money on the ticket, they make money through passengers doing most of their spending on board, paying the cruise company, for instance, dining on the cruise ships where it doesn't benefit our communities at all. You may think of a cruise as a luxury experience where you'd expect passengers to spend a lot in our stores or restaurants, but Otago University tourism professor James Higham says today's cruise passengers are less wealthy than they have been in the past and spend little in our local communities. So the cruise industry takes as much of the passenger spend as possible and doesn't share the benefits like other forms of tourism. Don't think that our economy relies on or benefits from the cruise industry. Cruise ship tourists are economically the worst tourists for us. But what else is wrong with cruise ships? Otago University academic Dr. Inga Smith calculated that a cruise ship holiday to New Zealand emits 4 times the greenhouse gas emissions of an equivalent holiday flying and staying in hotels. She says, from a climate change perspective, going on a cruise ship is one of the worst holidays that you can take. The cruise industry is so polluting that climate activists like me would encourage people to fly instead. The fuel that cruise ships burn puts carcinogenic particulates into our air. In terms of these particulates, one cruise ship is the equivalent of 1 million cars. We don't think about these mostly invisible ultrafine particulates, but we pay the cost when people die from cancer from air pollution caused by fossil fuels. According to the British Medical Journal, fossil fuel pollution kills 5 million people every year. They're poisoning passengers and the people of Auckland. A peer-reviewed study in the Marine Policy Journal says that cruise ships are responsible for 1/4 of all ocean waste, despite being only 1% of the merchant fleet. Our ocean ecosystems are under massive pressure, and hundreds of millions of people rely on these ecosystems for food. Here in Tāmaki Makaurau, cruise ships also disrupt our commuter ferries. 98 ferry sailings around Auckland were cancelled or delayed last December due to cruise ships arriving or departing from Princes Wharf. Not only do cruise ships bring us no benefits, they're contributing to climate chaos, they're killing people with air pollution, trashing our oceans, and disrupting our public transport. We demand that cruise ship emissions be included in Auckland's total emissions, the ones that count towards our emission targets. The emissions are being released into the atmosphere. They have to be part of our reduction goals as well. Although central government isn't taking action on emissions, you have the power to influence them. Declarations of climate emergency and the nuclear-free movement both worked like this, with local government taking the lead. We have made similar demands of Christchurch, Dunedin and Nelson councils, and will shortly be presenting to Wellington Council, asking them to listen to their constituents, their consciences, and take that first step. In November, the Climate Commission will be making recommendations to central government. They will likely recommend including cruise ship emissions in our targets. And while Central doesn't seem to care about the environment, if you take this step, then we believe they will too. Similar policies are being picked up around the world already. The UK and the EU will include emissions from international shipping and aviation, including cruise ships, in their trading schemes and targets from 2026. In summary, we want you to count cruise ship emissions now in the overall emissions total and count them in the city's climate targets. The statistics, they might be estimates, not perfect, but the risks of inaction are greater. We also want you to put in a real plan, a serious plan to address these emissions. Thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Robin, for that presentation. Slightly different perspective on cruise ships. Do we have some questions? Okay, Councillor Walker and Councillor Ferry.
A couple of questions. Is your group advocating for a shore power plug-in for cruise ships so that they don't burn the bunker fuel when they're in port?
We're advocating for less cruise ships, so having the shore power may reduce the emissions while the ships are in port, but doesn't address any of the emissions while they're travelling or any of the damage to our ocean ecosystems.
Sure. And then the second question is, if the issue is to do with the fuel of the cruise ship, and bunker fuel's bad news, is your group advocating for enhanced fuels, different fuels that are more environmentally friendly than the current ones, and that will also include electrification of cruise ships, which is possible?
For electrification, yes.
Thanks, Robin. Councillor Ferry.
Thanks very much. It's a really interesting idea, sort of trying to capture the emissions. Are there any studies overseas that are already doing this? Are there any examples that we could look to? I guess part of the challenge for me is, at what point do they become emissions that should accrue to our city as opposed to, say if the ship's coming from Sydney, when does it cross the line? So are there any international examples we could look at? Thanks.
We could look at Christchurch City Council. So they have included it so far in their inventory, but not in the emission targets. And the way they're counting it is the emissions from import, as well as half of the emissions from travelling to and from the port.
Thank you. Have you talked to Local Government New Zealand about sort of a New Zealand-wide council stance, or are you just going council by council?
We're just going council by council, but thank you for that suggestion.
Okay, I'm happy to move that we receive the presentation, seconded by Councillor Fletcher. I'll just say, Robin, that AT personnel are here, as indeed are some of our council transport officers, and I think certainly your presentation and your request will be forwarded to them and will be brought up in discussions, because you've raised a number of very pertinent points here that we should be considering, so thank you for that.
Thank you.
So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you again, and thank you for your team that have accompanied you today.